Hello, today is October the 18th, and if you're here for Harnessing the Value of Content with John Mancini, Noz Urbina, and Rob Hanna and myself, you are in the right place. Thanks for joining us. We've had about 500 folks register for today's show. I'm your host, Scott Abel. You can attribute anything I say to me at Scott Abel if you're using Twitter. Also, if you'd like to get more insight onto the issues that are affecting content professionals today, we encourage you to join our insiders mailing list at thecontentwrangler.com, where you can get access to exclusive members-only content, invitations to events like this, discounts on tools, techniques, and also other technologies. Today's show is brought to you by two companies. First of all, our top sponsor, Precision Content, who asks, if you're moving to DITA but don't know how to get started, Precision Content offers a full suite of services, including information architects and writers, ready to support your transition to intelligent content. To unlock the knowledge in your enterprise, do yourself a favor and stop by precisioncontent.com. Check out all their services there. Also today, we've got with us AIIM as a sponsor, the Association of Information and Image Management. They believe that information is our most important asset, even as far back as 1943, when the community was formed as the National Micrographics Association. Since that time, they've came a long way, and they cover a variety of information topics that we're going to be talking about, in fact, today. So check out AIIM on the web at AIIM.org. At the end of today's show, we're going to give away 5 copies of The Author Experience by Rick Yagadich. Rick is one of our authors in the Content Wrangler Content Strategy Series from XML Press of books that we've published this year, 7 so far in the last 2 years. We've got 5 more in the queue. If you're lucky, you'll receive a copy today. If not, check out the offerings at xmlpress.net or at your favorite online retailer. All right, a few housekeeping items. You can ask questions of the presenters by using the Questions tab on your viewing panel. Those questions go to me. I prioritize them and ask them aloud at the end of the show based on the time remaining. We'll also have a polling question at one time when we'll have my producer jump onto the call and explain to you how to use the polling feature. We'd love for you to share some feedback when the presenter asks for it. And speaking of presenter feedback, at the end of the show, we'd like you to rate the presenters and the quality of the information they provided today on a 1 to 5 rating scale using the feedback button that is on your viewing panel. 1 star is the lowest, 5 is the best. So use your rating power on the way out to let us know how we did. In addition, you'll notice there's an attachments and links section of the viewing panel where you can download some of the materials that were made available by today's presenters, including a PDF and a PowerPoint version of today's slideshow, a white paper on content reuse and innovation and content creation. In addition, you also have Noz Urbina has a strategy quick reference document that you're going to want to check out. You can download those at any time during the show. And the most popular question we get is this show being recorded? And the answer is yes. If you return to the URL on which you're viewing the show today, shortly after it's over, you will magically be presented with a recording that you can watch on your own, share with others, and even embed in a blog post or on a Facebook page. And we hope that you do. All right. That was a lot. With all that out of the way, let's welcome our first presenter to the stage. Rob Hanna, are you with us?
I sure am, Scott.
Hey, Rob, where are you broadcasting from today?
From Mississauga, Ontario, just outside of Toronto.
Excellent. And I believe that even though this is unusual, you have our special guest, extra double presenter, sitting right next to you, Noz Urbina. Is this true?
Hello. Yes, it is indeed. I've actually flown around the world to come sit next to Rob for this event.
Excellent. Where are you normally considering your home base?
Urbina Consulting is based out of Valencia, Spain, just down the coast from Barcelona. So this is a very special event to have us down here.
Excellent. And we're going to check in with our last presenter to make sure he's also on the line. John Mancini, are you with us?
Yes, I am, Scott. How are you today?
I am great. Where are you broadcasting from today?
From Herndon, Virginia, just outside of Washington, D.C. But I think we ought to do the next iteration of this outside of Barcelona. That sounds much nicer.
I think you would have little problem convincing us to do that.
We can all get
John,
together in one place.
Exactly. Without further ado, since I know we're short on time, I'm going to jump off, mute myself, be in the background. You guys take it away. I'll rejoin you for the question and answer segment of the program.
Great. Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be here. As Scott alluded, AIIM has been around for a long time. We have focused on this question of the role of content and information in business processes. And as you can see here, we believe that information is your most important asset, and we provide the skills to help you manage that. And I think the piece that's interesting about this webinar and this presentation today is that I've often sensed that there's been this strange division in the content space between the content creation side that Scott so ably represents and kind of the content utilization and management side, which has always been where AIIM plays. And I think there are some changes in the marketplace that are leading us down a path in which it's becoming increasingly important that we bring these worlds together, and I think that's a really exciting thing. And so I think as we get started here, what we'd like to do is start with a poll just to kind of gauge where everybody is coming from in this audience. And so, Trey, I'll turn this over to you, and you can guide us through the poll.
Okay, thanks, John, and welcome everybody to the webinar today. We have about 500 people on the line, so let's get started and find out a little bit about our audience. So the first polling question is up. If you are using the full screen capability, please go out of full screen because you won't be able to see the polling question and vote unless you do that. The question is, which of these is closest to your role? Content creator, that would be web, technical, marketing, or product. Content manager, content strategist, information architect and experience designer, or other. We'll give people about 30 more seconds or so, maybe 45 seconds for people to vote, and then I'll close out the poll and we can see how it's going. Well, it seems like we've got a little bit of a lag because I'm not seeing people voting, although I know that the voting has been triggered. We might have a technical glitch on that. So I tell you what, I'm going to leave the poll open to see if we can get some answers on this. And John, why don't you go ahead and continue with your presentation, and then we can come back to this.
Sure thing, Trey, no problem. It wouldn't be a webinar unless there was a little bit of a technological challenge along the way. I've done a lot of these things, so no problem at all. I've been doing this content management thing for 20 years, and I'm in the process personally of a bit of a change in my role at AIIM from being the president and chief operating officer of the organization into focusing more externally. And so that's gotten me thinking a little bit about this question about the content management space and where is that space going and how is it changing? And I think those changes actually have a direct bearing on those who care passionately about content creation. And so I think there's an opportunity for some bridges that maybe haven't existed in the past. So when I think about this, we really have been through three distinct eras in what I call managing this triad of challenges, people, processes, and technology. And Scott alluded earlier to the fact that AIIM has been around since 1943, which seems like a hell of a long time for an industry association to be around, given all the technology changes that have gone on. And really, when I think about this from the perspective of why we've sustained ourselves during all that time, it's really been about this triad, about people, processes, and technologies. Different elements change along the way. And but that common challenge, that common business challenge of how do I make these three things work more constructively together remained. So when I look at this, I think in my time at AIIM, I think we've been through three distinct eras. And the thing to keep in mind about these eras is that they're coming faster and faster. And I think the other thing to keep in mind is that they don't necessarily replace what came before. It would actually be kind of nice if they did, but the reality is that they don't. They're stacked on top of it. And so this creates an awful lot of potential for chaos in organization. And so I think some of the forces in the marketplace right now, particularly the ones that Noz will talk about in a little bit, are really driving some rationalization of this chaos. And so before getting to the bright and cheery and positive end of the story centered around customer experience, Let me just walk through these three eras, just so you have kind of a sense of how they fit together. And so the content management space grew up as the document management space and grew up in the focus on automating mission-critical, document-intensive processes, usually transactionally centric processes. And so most of the implementations during most of the time that I've been at AIIM were very custom, very expensive, very, very complex. And there wasn't really a whole focus on people that were using and creating content and documents. It was mainly on the folks that were in charge of handling the transactions in organizations. Around 2000, we migrated into this era that we called enterprise content management. It never really was a very perfect label, but it was an adequate label, I think, for describing what was happening in the marketplace, which was basically that the market was becoming more of a layer within the organization, the content layer that was referred to by other applications. We had within the industry, we've seen a lot of news about acquisitions in the last couple of weeks, but back in around 2000 or so, there was tons of this, all sorts of acquisitions, this creation of suites to try to make the integration of different facets of content management easier. And just about the time that all came together, it started to unravel again. SharePoint first, and then the file sync and share players came into the marketplace, which really upset price points and drove a very different kind of an industry. And then on the people side, we started to see an expansion of the number of people that touched content management systems in organizations. And that brings me to where we are now, which is mobile and cloud. And so what we have is a really interesting stew right now, where the latest technologies are driving process owners to own their own solutions, often buy their own solutions. It's leading to an amplification of those business processes. It's leading to a great premium on configuration and connection and mobile skills. I think it's starting to drive a premium on content creation skills, which I think Noz and Rob will talk about in a second. And then on the people side, it's driving an industry that's very, very centered on usability, on mobility. All of those things are very, very different from the industry that we've had before. And so, coming back to my central question that I started this is that, these eras are stacked on top of each other. They are not necessarily replacing each other. But I think there's a forcing function right now that's forcing organizations to think about this stack in a much more strategic way than they ever have before. And that's really what Rob and Noz are going to talk about. And I think the forcing function that's going on, and you think about, how do you make the C-suite in organizations care about either content management or content creation, which has been a challenge for both of these communities over the course of a couple of decades. But I think the forcing function is that the C-suite clearly cares about customer experiences right now. That's what you hear at every conference that you go to, every conference that they go to, and they come back into the organization and they talk about that. And I think that central idea of customer experiences is a forcing function that's going to force us to look more strategically at connecting these layers of the stack, and it's going to force us to look more strategically at how we create content in the first place, because customer experiences ultimately are a function of that creation experience. So with that, let me turn it over to my good friend Rob Hanna. And Rob is an interesting person in his own right because he tends to bridge these two worlds. He's an AIIM member, very active in the content creation community, and I really appreciate the perspectives that you've brought to the space over the course of the last year or so. So without further ado, Rob, take it away.
Yeah, hi, thanks, John. Yeah, it's been a very interesting journey having a feet in both camps for all these many years, being a director of the Society for Technical Communications during a period of my career, and now being a director of the Toronto chapter of AIIM. I've long struggled with how do we make content creation more of a focus for people who are managing content, and look at how structured content and structured authoring can play an important role in enterprise content. But one of the things we've talked about, and it really comes down to even talking about why did enterprise content management fail to live up to expectations, And, of course, we've thrown an awful lot of technology at the whole issue around enterprise content management over the years and not really understood why we're not seeing the results that we expect. And, I think a big part of the problem is that nobody owns content quality in the organization. Nobody is ultimately responsible, and nobody knows this more than a technical writer who's been part of a technical publications group, who's a dedicated writing team, who's constantly being shunted from product marketing to quality assurance to software development, falling under a different director or VP every 6 months. Nobody owns content quality or the customer experience, and that's really what we're trying to change here. So, as information managers, we need to take more responsibility for content quality. Content quality is going to be the next real frontier in advancements in information management. Technology will continue to evolve, but if we don't really take a look at governance and management of these standards and processes, we'll never see what we need to be able to see to really see the advancement in quality content within the enterprise. As being part of the AIIM community, and I've been through the Enterprise Content Management certification program, one of the things I realized is that AIM members or the AIM community really has an uneven view of the content lifecycle. We don't really quite see the entire picture of content lifecycle. So here we see what is typically known as the AIM content lifecycle, taking it from content creation, organization, collaboration, search, publishing, and then back to content creation. And AIM has invested a lot in research and technology and training and certification around each of these critical aspects of the content lifecycle, except for one, really. And that's on the whole content creation side of things. I mean, even if you look at this one box here, we see capture and create, and we know that we've invested a lot of time and money and technology around capture, scanning, digitization. But as a community within AIM, we really don't talk a whole lot about how content is created. And really, that plays or can play a very critical role in our ability to manage content. But not all content is created equal, right? So we understand the high value, or at least intrinsic value, of structured data within our organizations. Now, we've really gone a long way to establish a body of research and best practice around data management and data quality. So we understand that. And then we also understand, at the bottom of the pile, we've got email and transactional records and invoices and Word documents and PDF, all of this unstructured, unmanaged content, which we try to manage through technology. But in the middle layer, we have something where we have structured content or highly engineered content, really high value content. So how do you identify high value content in your organization? John wrote a really good blog post 2 months ago, and it's available on the AIM site. I think you can find it on the Content Wrangler and our site as well, that talks about the hallmarks of high value content. So here are 5 points to sort of take into account. So will the content be read by staff, partners, and clients? In other words, how do I manage expectations around quality for my products and services with my content? Will it be referenced over and over by the organization? Is this mission critical type of information that I need to be able to ensure that I always have the right version of this information and not a copy or a duplicate or a variation of the information, but I have the definitive source of information that I need to be able to perform my job? Now, will the content be reused by the organization in different forms? So write once, reuse many times. Will it be relied upon as documentation of key business decisions? And finally, will it be revised, reviewed, and approved many times by different roles across the organization? one of the biggest costs around managing content is getting to the approval stage and review of high-value content. So how do we have the right technology and processes in place to be able to manage this? So if your content touches on any number of these different points, then you're really looking at high-value content, and you need to look at the processes and technologies and the skills required to be able to properly manage that content within the enterprise. So to get started, we really need to look at building a strategy for success within your organization. So this all starts with looking at a content strategy that will help us to inform how we implement standardized content creation and management across the enterprise, to really leverage our content and find better ways to leverage the high value within that content. And part of this is really engaging the various areas of the business for which high-value content touches. And this is really where customer journey really starts to play a role. And my good friend here, Noz, is going to take us now through more information on what customer journey mapping is about and how it can really help to inform the development and management of high-value content within your organization.
Thank you very much, Rob. Okay, so what we've heard here today is John is telling a little bit about the background of our industry and some of the really big overarching trends that we've seen here in terms of how we relate to information. And Rob has done a good job of building up the principles and some of our key guidelines for addressing them. What I'm going to take you through is a bit of my world. So I'm a content strategist, and I work with large organizations who want to really get maximum leverage out of their content. So what a content strategist is someone who is going to align people, process, and technology to meet business goals. So the definition of good content, bad content is how well that content is performing as a business asset. One of the techniques that we use as content strategists is something called customer journey mapping. That has come out of, as John was alluding to earlier, changing market expectations. The customer previously was being fed by many parts of the organization, which were all working as independent publishing divisions, each putting together their assets and delivering them out. What that resulted in was extensive fragmentation in terms of what the customers were actually receiving. So different departments had their independent processes, independent ways of organizing information, labeling it, terminology, and just about anything else you can think of in terms of how you can do content was being replicated on a per department basis. What we're doing now is we're adding a fourth P to the PPT acronym of People, Process, and Technology, which is positioning. We're changing the positioning of content in the business, and internally and externally, we're seeing content as a valuable asset to be managed that directly affects customer experience. And when we position it like that, then we're going to get the attention of our colleagues, of our management, and those who can possibly fund initiatives and open conversations which otherwise would have been closed. So before I tell you too much about what customer journeys are, I first want to make a contrast to what they are not. So if you Google the term customer journey, you will get a lot of customer lifecycle diagrams. And the customer lifecycle is basically, it's a very common way that marketing departments or sales departments think about the sales funnel, where we go from people being contacts or not even contacts yet, just being out in the wilderness, to becoming contacts, considering our service or product, making a purchase, using it, and then being an advocate. This diagram here, for example, is a case study in how not to think about content. We're looking at different formats of content over time. You can see email up at the front, and then email never, as if you're never going to email your people again once they become customers. It's just an oversimplified linear picture of relationships in putting all of your contacts into these huge buckets. That's too big to manage and too massive to really address with content properly. If we take that customer lifecycle, anonymous contact lead, customer advocate, which is a very typical kind of customer lifecycle, when we do omnichannel journey mapping, what we're trying to do is provide a methodology for various people within the organization who may have never spoken before and gotten together to build a picture of a process through the customer's eyes. So not the way that it works on the website or the way that it works in the call center or the way that it works in the knowledge base, but the way that it actually works for a customer out in the real world, across silos and across touch points. So we may be looking at a process that goes, for example, from being a lead to being a customer. And this is an example that I use very often. So we're going to take a typical example. This one is for buying a set-top box. For example, a digital smart box that goes on your TV so you can get lots of new channels and do digital video recording and stuff like that. So if we take the process typically, the customer makes a purchase, makes a decision and completes an online form. That happens on the web. They're then going to receive an email with instructions to tell them what to do next, and that email is going to tell them that they have to call the call center to make an appointment for installation. The field engineer then comes to install the equipment, and after a time, they're going to receive and pay their first bill. So that's a very typical kind of typical process, and this is a real-world example. And what happens when we do this customer journey mapping process is we start to see it not from the siloed perspective, but from that customer's perspective. You can see already we've got 5 touch points, billing, CRM, web, email, call center, and field team. So we could never have done this process properly at all within a single department. We had to do it collaboratively across teams. But when we do that, we can look at it from the customer's point of view and take a walk in their shoes. And what we realized was, after installation, the machine may be working, but the job isn't done. What happens is, you go in there, you install your equipment or provide your service, and then the customer has to actually use it. So what was happening is that customers would have their new equipment, and the engineer would get them to sign the form that they had been there and installed it. And then the customer is left to have to poke at this device that they've never worked with before. And so there's this big dip in customer experience right when they've actually got the thing that they signed up for. So you're leaving an opportunity where the customer is going to be disenchanted with your service. So what we do is we realize there's another step to this journey, which is testing. The field engineer puts the remote control in the hand of the customer, makes sure that they can turn it on, turn it off, knows what button to press to get onto the channel catalog, and can assign something to be recorded on the digital video recorder. Once that is done and the customer is empowered, then the field engineer has done their job. What does that mean for content? It means that we've just created some new content requirements. Those field engineers are going to have to be trained in doing an interaction they've never done before. They may not have the customer interaction experience at all, so they might have some personability training or interaction training. They're going to have a script that they're going to follow for exactly what needs to be tested. The form that records how the job was done to tick the boxes from the customer's point of view is going to have to be changed. The customer service quality checking afterwards is going to change because they're going to ask the customers a new question about how that process went. And then, of course, the reports and the record management around how well that business function is being performed will change. Because we'll be monitoring a new data point that was never on our reports before. So what inevitably happens when we take a walk in the customer's shoes is all sorts of process changes and content changes start to come to light. We realize how we could be serving customers better. So I mentioned that Rob is telling a lot about how we need to strategize around the value of content. We need to separate high-value content from other content in the organization. And this is one of the techniques we actually use. Is that content fitting into a high-value journey? If so, where? Is it performing well? If not, what should we do about it? This methodology of coming together and looking through the customer journey allows us to do that separation of what is truly high value, what is important for the brand and important for the customer, and optimizing our strategy and process around how it's managed. I can't tell you the number of clients who don't do this and customer experience falls through the cracks. So where omnichannel journey mapping fits into the content strategy lifecycle landscape is as a unification piece. We have your usual content strategy efforts, some of you will be familiar with. So we're doing things like inventory, audit, analysis on our content set. We're building personas and doing user research. The brand has particular strategic objectives and commercial goals, and we have a task matrix of the user's tasks, insights from our market reports, and we have analytics. All of that is unified into the omnichannel journey map, which enables us to then, I just want to make a little side note there. If you're doing customer journey mapping, you should probably tell your persona researchers that you're doing omnichannel journey mapping so they don't come back with a website journey or an app journey or a retail environment journey. They should realize they're thinking about an omnichannel journey. So they ask the right questions and collect the right data. Once you do that, you can really begin design work. And we design many, many things. Editorial plans, content models, writing guidelines, taxonomies, UX and visual designs, interface designs, and even development specifications. So I'll give you an example. I have a banking client who wants to be able to have call to actions on the website that say, contact us. And you can contact them by web chat, phone, or going to a branch. And they want to tell you, if you call us right now, call volumes are high and you could wait 10 minutes. But if you do an instant chat here on the website, you'll only wait 2 minutes. That means some developer has to bring that data up into the web content in a way they never did before. So any kind of specification or design information can come out of omnichannel journey mapping. Once we've got that, we can actually create content, as Robert is describing, deliver it, and then we can measure and optimize, feeding back into our organization so that we are continuously improving our insight into how we deliver content and how it's performing. This is an example. I think you'll have a better look at it when you download the slides, but it's a lost card from one of my banking clients. And we go through all the steps and stages of losing your card, what questions as a user you'll be asking along the way, and then what content assets that you'll be needing to resolve those questions. What we want to be doing is aligning the calls to action across the journey. We have different areas of the business, people who are handling search and social, people who are handling content marketing like white papers, blogs, how-tos, and other educational assets, which point to or should point to product content that describe features and functions from a marketing point of view. And then we're getting deep into the organization and we might have the real technical documentation that's behind that. What we want to be ushering people through a story that we are telling so that the different parts of our content landscape are integrated and bringing our customer along the journey we want them to have, which is, of course, designed to support the journeys that they want to go on. And we want even our technical documentation to be suitable to be representing our brand up front, pre-sale, and maybe even pointing back to our upsell opportunities and other content marketing or product marketing pieces. I have a software client that gets 6 times more clicks putting upsells next to technical documentation versus what they get when they're on product documentation, on product marketing information. So on the nice shiny marketing pages, people don't want to click through, but when they're engaged with solution finding and technical documentation, that's when they're looking for solutions, and that's a great time to actually offer them commercial information. And of course, we want our content marketing good enough that it's worth being shared out on search and social as well. So right there, I can hand it back to our gracious hosts to start off the discussion.
Excellent. So one of the first things I wanted to say was to the audience, our platform is experiencing a little problem, which is why you couldn't answer the polling questions, which was no big deal. We were actually just asking one little question to kind of help us guide the discussion. But I have been able to receive some questions from the audience, and I've got some questions here that we've pre-agreed to discuss. So let's tackle those first. So as we start to look at the three of you and where we all come from and kind of our history, we all wanted to tackle, I think, this big nugget called enterprise content. And we wanted the experience to be good with content across the enterprise or anywhere that a customer touches it. But today, what does the phrase enterprise content strategy really mean? And I wanted to post this to John first just to see how an entity that kind of went down that path has recognized this, because it seems to me that we're trying to do a lot, and maybe that's theoretically a good idea, but maybe not in the real world. John, what are your thoughts on where we are when we talk about enterprise content strategy today?
Yeah, I think that is a really good point, Scott. I mean, that was when I was a little tongue-in-cheek about saying that enterprise content management had been a useful but not perfect term. I think that's what I was really alluding to, and it really, I think, listening to Noz in particular, I think enterprise content strategies are determined in the context of use cases and in the context of how customers and employees and suppliers utilize that content. And almost by definition, when you think about the huge variety that exists between customers, between suppliers, between employees, all the different jobs they have, it's kind of crazy to think that that's going to happen, magically at some gigantic Uber strategy level. And so I guess the thing that it's a nice phrase, and it almost reminds me a little bit of the when the environmental movement used to say, think globally but act locally. That, yes, you want some of the pieces in this business from a content perspective to tie together, but the real meaningful work actually occurs in the context of use case and processes and how customers interact with those things.
And I had a discussion with the author of Managing Enterprise Content, a Unified Content Strategy, Ann Rockley, on a webinar in the past where I believe she said something like, if she had it to do all over again, she wouldn't have called the book Managing Enterprise Content, even though that's what she was after, right? That was the Holy Grail. So Rob and Noz, what do you think? Is it more practical now for us to think about solving these smaller cross-departmental problems? And if so, are we even really, in a practical manner, re-engineering the entire enterprise, or are we just trying to connect disparate systems and content together?
Well, I'll just go in before they take it away, is that the kind of use case that Noz was talking about those are really significant and not easy. And so, there might be smaller than the big label enterprise content strategy, but they are certainly daunting tasks.
Yeah, and I tend to tilt at windmills. I can't help it. And, the holy grail of enterprise content and enterprise content strategy seems daunting and near impossible, the way we seem to be de-evolving as enterprises, where even centralized information security is becoming a thing of the past. I mean, we're putting so much power into our employees' hands and trying to manage a lot less, letting people manage themselves. So how does that get us anywhere close to having enterprise content standards within an organization? But I think that we're still headed in that direction. When we talk about newer technology, smarter technology, requiring us to standardize a lot of the way in which we create content and we package content. Like, one of the big problems we've had managing enterprise content are all the various formats of content that we've got out there. The lack of visibility into many of these formats because they're so impenetrable. We talk about the vast wasteland of the dark data, the digital landfill where we have network drives full of PowerPoint slides and PDF files and Word documents where we have no visibility. And so we want to get technology in there to semantically enrich all of these assets so that we can mine intelligence from it. But there's so much garbage in these landfills that, trying to sort the wheat from the chaff is a near impossible task. So, I think by changing how we look at content creation and look at what we're managing, we can get closer towards something that's a more viable enterprise content strategy. And in addition to that, these are things that have to prove themselves out over time. This almost needs to start, as you say, start thinking globally, act locally, have a solution that is going to gain traction organically within the organization. So other parts of the organization say, I want a part of that. I want to play. I want my content to be rich too. How do I do that? So, like I say, still not windmills. I think we're still headed in this general direction. I just think it's going to take a rethink to get there.
Thanks, Rob. Noz, what are your thoughts?
I was never a fan of the enterprise content strategy thing. I've been in this game 20 years, and I've watched a lot of enterprise content anythings go into the ground due to their inability to be feasible. What I'm seeing more effective these days is a hierarchy of strategies. So I've participated in some CEO offsite kind of management workshops for multinationals, and what they're trying to do is build a pyramid scheme of strategies. They have a very high level enterprise strategy, and then each division lead will be building what their strategy is to feed into that higher strategy, and so on and so on, until we get down to a team who's responsible for creating some content. So the important word in content strategy is the strategy bit. It's got to be feeding into something to be relevant, and it has to be able to be compartmentalized. What is valuable is building meaningful strategic alliances. So I'm working with this other department. We're going to work together because we share a lot of touch points and customers move back and forth between us regularly. And maybe if we get something good going, a third or part of the business will participate. If we find out that there's another pair of teams doing this somewhere else, let's talk to them. And so I think that we have to be able to build some bridges. The silos will not go away. And any enterprise, by the time you, in theory, did do something global, you're going to acquire another company or get acquired or merge or something like that. And you're going to have to start over again. So it's a matter of, rather than having this point on the horizon called enterprise content strategy, it's a rolling machine that is robust and agile, that allows teams to collaborate and share more and be more organized than they were before. Not chasing this utopia of the one day when we'll have this problem fixed.
Right, and I hear you there. I also think about it from the customer perspective. So what I heard was an organizational problem. What I hear my mom saying is, I don't give a shit about why your content problems are problems. To me, I blame the brand. And that begs the question, is it practical to have a single source for all content? And if it's not, then should we be using APIs, which are nothing more than agreed upon standards between two systems to exchange information to get closer to the customer so that we're not being dissatisfactory in our presentation of content that's confusing and all of those other things that silos create?
Yeah, I am very anti the single system to rule them all kind of idea, and it's a matter of sharing certain base standards like how we categorize, how we label, terms that we use, the language that we use. But there are going to be various repositories in the business, and we have to be able to deal with that.
Well, there's repositories, but I think I don't want to represent the importance of standards.
Absolutely.
Right. So
which keep those repositories in line.
Well, that's exactly right. So it's the development of these standards that enable us to move closer towards a unified enterprise content strategy. And Noz, you and I have been working quite extensively lately on helping to develop structures and writing standards that will allow for that standardization for unification.
Mm-hmm. It's about interlinking the silos so that they can speak to each other, not imagining that they will all come into one master system.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
when we say standard,
that's exactly the case, because, Noz, it really struck me on your slide about the set-top box that, the evolution of the content management space has been that each of those functional units that you described that were integral to that customer journey, our data suggests that they probably have multiple content repositories and vendors, but just because of the way this industry grew up. And so those interconnection points, nobody's going to rip out that stuff. And so those interconnection points become really, really, where the action is and where the heavy lifting, I think, needs to occur.
Well, I think, John, you're right on the mark there. It's about those points where those things intersect, which I wanted to make sure that the audience didn't think we were talking about approved standards by some kind of standards body, because if you look up the word standard, it's an agreement between two or more organizations to do something for a reason, and that usually has some kind of authority, right? And when you have software that requires content to be shared in a certain way, that standard is, could be just an agreed upon way for three different systems to talk within one company to kind of tackle this enterprise challenge, which brings us to the next question. If content is really thought of as a business asset, which I know all of us believe, wouldn't it be placed on the balance sheet? That's my obvious question. And Rob, I know you have a great practical answer for this, and then let's discuss the kind of around the issue. So why isn't content on a balance sheet?
Well, content's not on a balance sheet because it's not allowed to be on a balance sheet. Quite plain and simply, the Federal Accounting Standards Board, which sets the rules for generally accepted accounting procedures, not just for the United States, but for many, many countries around the world, has specifically disallowed companies to place a value on their data, on their content that can be part of the balance sheet. Instead, companies are valued, their knowledge or their information all becomes part of a company's goodwill, a big amorphous blob of goodwill that represents what the company knows, the data that they have, what makes them unique in the marketplace. So the reason content's not on the balance sheet is because it's not allowed to be on the balance sheet.
Got it. Noz, I know you have a strong feeling about this, though. So what's your thought? And then how could we get leaders to understand the value if we can't put it on a sheet that they're looking for value on?
Right. Yes, I have very strong feelings on this. The fact that I spend a lot of my time presenting to executives and funders of content initiatives these days. I do what it's called castle storming and help connect those who have the knowledge and the pain with those who have the power to help them, and within the organization, I mean. We can present a value of content. It's not part of how the organization declares its official tax valuation to the world. It is an internal metric. So you were saying we're investing this amount of money into this area of our business, and we are deriving this much value out. And we can see, for example, when we make content changes, we can see cash-related impacts. So we can see a reduction in support calls. We can see an uptick in downloads. We can see an increase in self-service sales. We can see all sorts of directly quantifiable cash-related changes in our business that we can track back to content changes if we set it up properly, and we don't measure our content on what are called vanity metrics like hits or likes. These are meaningless things because no one's in the business of selling hits or likes except for maybe some ad agencies. So we have to be measuring something that relates to a customer journey that comes to a business important conclusion. That's how we want to be managing today and giving content a role in these commercial processes which can then be measured.
And John, from your vantage point, given your historic audience, although I know that's changing and lots of people are interested in what you're talking about today because, as you mentioned earlier, the world is changing and so is technology around content. But who needs to be involved in this discussion? Do the people at the other end also need to be aware of these things so that content can be valued as an asset?
Yeah, this concept of infonomics, which is, how do you place a measure on the value of information, has been floating around for quite some time. And I think about that. We did a white paper just in the last month or two that was the aggregation of a group discussion of about 50 people from both the user and the supplier side talking about this. And I think the net of that conversation was very much in line with what Noz was talking about, which is that not all content is created equal. The value of content occurs in the context to which it is used. I think about a lot, Doug Laney from Gartner is the guy who's really been spending a lot of time talking about this concept of infonomics, and Doug divides, his valuation into two parts. Okay, well, what's the part that's relevant to customers? What's the part that has relevance to internal operations? There's all sorts of different measures of value. You have a cost value, a market value, an economic value of content, the business value if you would resell it. There's all sorts of different parameters there. And so I think that, it would be really nice from a forcing function of forcing people to pay attention to this to, have content valued on the balance sheet. But it's certainly not going to be all content, and it's certainly not, it's just going to be more complicated than simply saying stick it on the balance sheet, because it goes back to the fundamental points that everybody was making during the course of the day here today, is that not all content's created equal, and content has value in the context in which it is used.
Great. And to help the audience, because that's who we're serving today, our customers, I would like for each of you to take just a breath for a second. I'm going to ask a question of one or two of you and get a quick answer, because these are questions that are coming in from the audience. So the first one is, assuming that content curation is either part of enterprise content management or document management, what would you think? Where does curation fit, Noz?
I think that there's a very interesting trend going on, which we haven't discussed too much, which is one of the ways to bring silos together is a centralized metadata management application. So something like a pool party or a central system that understands the relationships between bits of metadata. So a bunch of people are tagging content over there, a bunch of people tagging content over there. So how do we map between our audiences, the services that we provide, the context they're in, and so on. And putting all that into one system that allows you to say, I think that our assets on skiing are valuable to our less than 50 customers who are in countries that are cold, and making those connections in one place. That's a form of curating content by curating the relationships between the tags we put on content. Mm-hmm. That's really, really powerful. I think curation does play a role. I think that the details of that are different depending on how how you're managing your content, how structured is it, what granularity you have, and so on.
Mm-hmm. Great. We are running out of time, so we're going to skip right to the next question.
You're short on time, Scott. That was an awesome answer.
That was an awesome answer. All right. Cognitive computing and artificial intelligence is kind of the hot button thing. In fact, I'm just getting ready to leave to go to IBM Watson World and then to Watson Developer Conference. So why is it important, or how important is it that we invest in improving the way our content is created? This is for the content creation people, so that we can gain benefits in the future. So, Rob, why is it necessary to keep on making structured content if computers are going to be able to understand unstructured content too?
Well, that's great, and really this has been a big inspiration for my entire career. Is how are we going to make the machines intelligent, right? With content, with our information. How do we exchange information efficiently between human readers and machine readers, machine learning, and I think it all comes down to having semantically rich content, which helps to disambiguate information for machines. We disambiguate our own information by many different cognitive practices, looking at how content's formatted, building in intonation and style. We can derive a lot of semantics. Machines, of course, can't. Right? So they need to take information very, very literally. So we need to provide additional semantic context to it so that it knows how to work with that information and can look and sort through even small amounts of information, because we're talking about being able to deploy these machines not just on a grand scale, but within your company, where you have a very small amount of source content to start, that you need to be able to disambiguate that information semantically for machines. And so I think it becomes just that much more, that important. Go ahead, Noz.
I'm going to jump in there with an example to try to make that a bit more concrete. I've seen a lot of organizations that are trying to throw everything they have into FAQs. Right. Anything that isn't a product description or a contact us page is an FAQ. It just means place that I could put stuff on the site and it'll be there. That's really not very effective because the actual semantics, as Rob was saying, the meaning of what's in that can be very different. We have to break down for a computer what is going on inside a piece of content. If you look at a Google search result today versus 5-6 years ago, you're going to get real answers to questions. You ask, when is this local supermarket open until, and it will tell you it's open till 7 o'clock. It didn't read that page and with the magic of algorithms figure that out. There's semantic metadata. There's meaningful descriptive metadata in those pages telling the search engine what a schedule is, what a retail environment is, where it is geographically, and then it's able to understand an answer. And Google is encouraging us to do that because Google has said, we can't figure this out with natural language search. You have to tell us. You have to mark up your data properly. And they've gotten together with Yahoo and Microsoft to use a single metadata standard that you can see on schema.org. That's a site for technical people, so I warn you. But the idea is they've said, we can't do this with natural language and AI. You have to put an amount of basic metadata in there, then we can make inferences. And that's what our intelligence is going to do. It's going to infer from what you've told it, not read every sentence.
Yeah, it's going to be based on probability. And I think the big lesson here is machine learning is just like human learning. It's based on teaching. So you first have to teach a system how to do something. All right, so let's talk really quickly about the customer journeys. Why do content professionals of all types, John, this is particularly aimed at you, need to understand the customer journey? Not just the people who create it, but why does everybody need to understand?
I think because it puts the content management challenge into context. And I think the conversation that we had earlier in the Q&A about those three words, enterprise, content, and strategy, and I think there's been a fallacy for a long time that the most important word in there was the enterprise word, and it's really the least important word. The most important ones are the content and the strategy, and so it's not enough for say somebody who runs a content management implementation in a particular business process to understand how their particular process works. That's a necessary condition, but it's not a sufficient one for what the organization needs, which is that he or she needs to understand how that process works in the context of the other processes to which they connect. And I think the way to understand that is to take a step back and view it through the customer's eyes, because the customer doesn't understand. The customer isn't aware that there's all these fabulous departments that we've created, each with their own systems. They just expect it to work across that journey. And
they don't care, right?
That's a very unifying kind of way of thinking about this.
Yeah, they don't care about these artificial separations either, which begs the question for Rob and Noz. How do we know that content created outside of marketing and sales then actually impacts the sale?
This is something I work on a lot. So I have a long background in technical communications. So that's my original stomping grounds, and now work mainly in marketing content and content marketing, which are two different things. But we are still seeing that any kind of content that touches a customer journey will affect the sale. So that is information that could be considered technical documentation. That's forms and transactional stuff that helps the process of working with the organization. That is, your data sheets. That's stuff that's happening and being shown at trade shows. Anything the customer sees can affect a sale. And if you have any kind of complicated service of any description, as if you're talking about something like Dropbox, your ability to get new customers it will be based on what they think that post-sales experience is going to be like. So they're often using documentation. Maybe Dropbox wasn't the best example, but any kind of enterprise product is definitely going to be. They're going to be looking at specifications and more meaty stuff before they make a real big investment.
Excellent. And I'm afraid that is the wrap. We are out of time for today's show. So in summary, we brought together all of you different people. And believe me, when we look at your titles of the 500 people that registered for today's show, you are all kinds of content professionals, from translation and localization and content modeling and content analysis and writers, managers of all sorts. What we've learned is that we've got major challenges to overcome, and our content's not really where it needs to be in order to get there. So one of the big pieces of advice I think we can give from this show is think about the customer journey. It's seldom linear. It's seldom what we imagine it to be. And that every interaction a customer has with our brand at every touch point is going to impact how they feel about us. And that leads to revenue or not in the future. We've got tons of opportunities everywhere for improvement. And I can't say enough about the kinds of issues that we've talked about today. I wanted to thank all of our presenters. But before I do, I want to say if you're one of these 5 people that are listed on this slide, you've won a copy of the author experience from Rick Yagodich. Today, though, I want to thank all of our presenters during the last minute here. Noz, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Rob, same to you, and thanks for hosting Noz today. That was excellent to have you both in the same location.
Yeah, always a pleasure.
John, thanks from the boiling East Coast for joining us in that unusually warm weather. I really appreciate that as well.
Thank you very much.
We've got lots to talk about. Today's show was definitely brought to you by 2 big organizations that are trying to solve these problems, Precision Content and AIIM, so check them out on the web and learn whatever you can from them. I was your host today for the show, Scott Abel, and thanks for joining us for harnessing the value of content on your way out. Please leave a rating based on the content that we produced today. Apologies for the technical glitches during the polling, and make sure to check out the recording at the URL you're using to watch today's show. Until next time, do good work. Thanks for joining us. I'm Scott Abel. Have a great day.